So fantastic to see you all here. It's a great pleasure to welcome you. I'm really pleased that you've chosen to join our webinar. We've had so many webinars these days that one starts to choose them very carefully, which ones to engage with and which ones not. And I feel a real privilege that you've chosen our webinar to engage with. It's fantastic to see all the introductions already flowing in from all around the world. Huge welcome to you. You can see many friends there, some people that are new. Hope we can become friends through these webinars and get to know you a little bit. This is a very dynamic type of webinar. We really do welcome your inputs, your thoughts, your comments. So again, a warm welcome. This webinar really seeks to decode the latest board meeting, GCF board meeting 28. We call it decoding GCF B.29, and it's really a great pleasure to welcome you here today. My name is Grant Bella-Tremere. I'm the director of the company ECO. We are a company really specialized in climate finance. We do training and capacity building. We do market studies, strategy development, and formulation of project proposals for the GCF, for other funds as well. So it's within the context that we do this work. We're going to be talking about a study today that we have done on responding to GCF comments. We're going to also give you some insights, sort of our take-home messages from the last board meeting. I just want to stress that these are our viewpoints related to the board meeting. I tend to be rather outspoken, give you my point of view on things that may not be right. You may have different viewpoints. It's not an official viewpoint from anyone. It's our view, and it comes from a project design and development point of view. We're really interested in what makes great projects work. We know that most great projects are built on great foundations, and that's the project design. And that starts from the project idea through concept note, the process of developing that concept note, then turning it into a funding proposal, the work that is done right up to the moment of signing that funding agreement. So that's our passion. That's why we do these webinars. That's why we track the board meeting. And we're keen to pass those thoughts on to you. It's our viewpoint of these meetings. Hopefully you'll appreciate that because we can talk frankly about how we see things unfolding at the moment. And please do continue to introduce yourself. It's so great to see so many people engaging in the chat. Please do that. Our agenda today is around a number of different elements. We have some polls. In those polls, you will be asked certain questions during the presentations and even right now. We welcome you to submit the region that you come from, what kind of organization you're involved in, and others that have been voted there. It's really helpful for us to be able to see who's participating and get your viewpoint, and then tailor what we're saying specifically to help you in this. From a technical point of view, you go to questions if you would like to ask a question. The great thing about the questions tab is that you can upvote questions. If you want to hear the answer to that, that means we can triage them, we can prioritize them, and really address the highest priority ones before. We've got a good amount of time set aside for questions. Maybe we'll be able to get through everything. If we can't get through all questions, even those that are not voted up to the top of the list, if we can't get through them, we address those questions after the webinar, and we will circulate it to you in a package with the video recording, all the slides, and the answers to questions and other things that we've referred to along the way. So that'll be a useful resource, I hope. We are going to hear today in terms of the agenda first from my colleague Marcus Arcanjo. He will be talking about our publication GCF Insight, which is based on a small survey and interviews that we did from accredited entities related to their experience of responding to GCF comments. We've heard from many of you all around the world around how that publication has really, I suppose, touched a nerve on the one side and also provided reassurance in that we are all experiencing similar types of challenges. Well, challenges are there to be overcome. So hopefully the GCF Insight and Marcus's presentation will help with that. Then I will be discussing the latest insights on project design and impacts from the 29th board meeting. I found it quite fascinating. There were long periods of procedure. I'll talk a little bit about that, but there were some very interesting insights that help us for project design from it. And then we'll have our usual Q&A. I already said we'll be sending out the webinar kit. It'll include the slides, it'll include the video recording and other resources. To do that, just sign up on our latest thinking list and you'll receive it. Submit questions as we go. I don't think there are any questions there live at the moment, but please feel free to put in your questions and your thoughts there. Let's get going. So I'll pass on to Marcus. Marcus is a senior analyst here in our team. His background is around, he's got an MSc in Development and Security from a UK university and a BSc in Business Economics. That's from Cardiff University. He's a researcher and analyst working on climate finance projects, including the GCF and the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, and in climate action, particularly related to cities. He's got experience in that. So yeah, Marcus, over to you for this presentation.
Thank you, Grant, and welcome everyone to this latest webinar. I'll be discussing the results from our latest report, GCF Insight 18, which focuses specifically on navigating GCF feedback from project submissions. This is definitely a topic we've discussed a lot here internally at ECO, and we hope that the information we'll provide will be useful to other project designers. Here at ECO, we understand that writing and designing fundable climate projects can be extremely challenging. The process of obtaining this funding often comes with a lot of scrutiny on the project design. And this is entirely understandable when we consider that these large funds, such as the Green Climate Fund, are responsible for distributing billions of dollars in climate finance. So it's in their best interest to study these proposals in significant detail and pick apart elements within the project design that aren't quite up to standard. The GCF process in particular is quite challenging because there are so many different stages where the Secretariat, the Climate Investment Committee, the Independent Technical Advisory Panel and the Board are all involved in project proposal reviews before final funding can be approved by the Board. In total, this process can typically take around half a year, but has been known to be stretched out even longer. With so many different review stages and different review teams, we can see that there are plenty of opportunities for critiques, comments and questions about project design. These are the comments that this report hopes to focus on and identify common areas where project design struggles. To inform this report, we conducted a study that consisted of a survey and semi-structured interviews throughout May and June of this year. We were lucky to have 58 survey responses and conducted 4 interviews with people from accredited entities, consultancies and NGOs. In terms of the breakdown of survey respondents, 41% represented accredited entities, 35% represented consultancies and individual consultants advising accredited entities, 9% were from national designated authorities, and the remaining 15% were a mixture of NGOs, civil society organisations and government agencies. The objective of this study and the broader report was to help identify and understand the most common types of comments that project designers receive on GCF projects. We asked relevant stakeholders about the comments they routinely receive when submitting proposals to the GCF. We also asked people to help identify the particular topics within the proposal that they struggle with the most, as well as the broader challenges of effectively addressing these comments. Lastly, we asked both survey respondents and interviewees to provide potential recommendations that they feel would help them avoid these types of GCF comments in future project design. So, here's what we found. I'll go over each of them in a bit more detail in the following slides, but I'll touch on them briefly here. Firstly, respondents highlighted that key areas where they received most frequent comments from the GCF were the climate rationale, and specifically the difficulty and inflexibility of data requirements within that. Also, the main project components and activities, as well as the various financial elements that must be included in every proposal, such as the economic and financial analysis, as well as co-financing. Secondly, both survey respondents and interviewees identified that they often get massive volumes of comments from the GCF, as well as multiple rounds of comments, which can often lead them to have much longer timelines for project approval to move through the relevant stages. And thirdly, respondents want to see greater transparency and communication from both within the GCF, within the teams within the GCF, as well as from the GCF to accredited entities and project designers. They believe that this would help streamline the process of receiving and addressing GCF comments in the future. As mentioned in the previous slide, the top 3 topics that project designers receive GCF comments on are the climate rationale, the financial elements within projects, and the project activities and components. Approximately 68% of survey respondents answered that they regularly receive comments on the climate rationale. For those who may not be familiar with the GCF process, the climate rationale provides a scientific and technical basis for the projects, as well as the climate-based justification of the proposed activities. But many respondents cited a lack of clarity and inflexibility on the data requirements for this section of the proposal. For example, many people, especially those working in highly vulnerable countries like small island developing states and African nations, said that they often lack accurate historic climate data to use within the climate rationale. In order to navigate this climate rationale successfully, they believe there needs to be significantly more guidance and flexibility on how best to proceed in situations where data simply does not exist. They argue that the direction of change regarding future climate vulnerabilities is clear, even if these countries or regions lack the capacity to capture and distribute data to provide more precise projections and historic data. Secondly, people seem to struggle with the financial aspects required within GCF proposals. 46% of our respondents pointed to the economic and financial model as an area that they receive comments on frequently. On top of that, an additional 35% said that issues such as co-financing or the breakdown of funding for project components was something that they need more help with. One accredited entity that we interviewed told us that they often struggle to successfully integrate innovative financial mechanisms into their project design because they're not entirely sure what the GCF is looking for. They suggested that additional guidance or calls with the GCF to provide clarity on these topics would benefit them significantly, as well as any others who are struggling with the same thing. And lastly, project designers told us that project components and activities also receive a lot of comments. 44% of our respondents told us that they frequently get comments in this area and that they often find them quite difficult to resolve. Many people noted that project components and activities often receive positive feedback during the earlier concept notes phases, but more critical feedback during the funding proposal stage. They felt that this creates significant challenges within their project design as core elements have to be changed later rather than earlier. This, in turn, can lead to alterations in project outcomes or outputs. To overcome these challenges, several people suggested that intense scrutiny of project activities and components should be provided as early as possible during the development of the project concept, rather than later on in the funding proposal to avoid significant project design changes. We also asked survey respondents to highlight key obstacles and challenges that make the process of addressing the comments more difficult. 3 key areas came up pretty frequently, and these are that there's often repetitive feedback, and it seems as though comments aren't synchronized to avoid repetition. Also, the volume and multiple rounds of comments seem to lead to lengthier timelines that leave people feeling disenchanted with the overall process, because it could take many, many months for a project review to move from one stage to the next. Digging into this in a bit more detail, we saw that a popular comment from survey respondents was that they often receive many comments that are similar or are identical in nature. They said that this makes them feel as though there is a lack of communication between GCF review teams. Several people said that they often felt that their funding proposal hadn't been read from cover to cover because many of the comments or questions on their project design were answered within another section of their submission. Others felt that there is a lack of quality assurance before sending the comments back to project designers. One person suggested that a way to improve this was to coordinate internally their comments and seek clarity and clearance from management early on to see whether a proposal would fit priorities and whether it would be supported by the GCF as early as possible. Other people said that sometimes comments didn't seem especially relevant to them and suggested a way that the GCF could integrate a comment framework that ranks comments from most important to least important. That way, both accredited entities and GCF reviewers can work more effectively with the limited time that they have. On the other hand, lots of other people said it wasn't the nature or content of the comments that they actually struggle with, but rather the massive amount and many rounds of them that they face. For example, over 78% said that they received more than one round of comments on their project submissions. One international accredited entity that we interviewed told us that they're now on their 8th iteration of a concept note, which initially started as being just 12 pages and is now 45 due to attempting to address GCF comments. In situations like this, there is often limited capacity to respond in an accurate and timely manner due to such vast numbers of comments. To help improve this, many people suggested that there needs to be greater harmonisation of GCF comments internally, which would reduce the time for the GCF themselves taken to review submissions, as well as the time taken for accredited entities to respond to these comments. The last challenge that was clearly highlighted by those involved in this study was a result of the repetitive feedback and the multiple rounds of comments, and that is that it leads to long project approval timelines. Several people seem very frustrated that it can take several months to receive comments on their concept note or funding proposal. Some said that by the time they do get their feedback, they may be told that their project no longer fits within the priority areas, which they feel leaves their project up in the air and stranded. They suggested that being able to speak regularly with the GCF would be something that would allow for a much more streamlined process in terms of responding to GCF comments. But naturally, this is much easier in theory than in practice because the GCF receives an enormous volume of project submissions each year and only has a limited capacity to review them. So, this report has highlighted several sticking points that hinder faster and more efficient progress within the GCF approval process. We found that there seems to be a gap between the GCF's expectations and what project designers feel as though they can offer. However, it's also important to note that while many people highlighted areas where they believe challenges exist, they also praised many areas of recent progress. For example, people said that the introduction of additional stages within the process, such as the reviews of the Climate Investment Committee, has added valuable input that previously did not exist. Others also said that the regular publication of additional guidance and resources has provided extra clarity that helps them with their project design. Nonetheless, it was also very clear that continuing to produce these resources would be very useful. Many people suggested that they'd like to see the option for the GCF to hold more frequent participatory discussions with project designers to understand the problems that designers face. They also said that creating additional knowledge and learning resources, including on the topics covered within this report, would be something that they'd really love to see. Over 90% of our respondents said that they believe this would be helpful for their projects. Lastly, there should be a focus on enhanced communication and coordination of the internal review process to avoid or at least reduce repetitive or inconsistent comments that make it very difficult to streamline the process. Recommendations varied pretty broadly, from increasing flexibility to better understand local context to enhancing quality assurance to ensure continuity in comments. But overall, there was an overarching central theme, and that is that project design should be focused on viability, impact, and the merit of the proposed interventions rather than ensuring documentation is perfect. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening, and I'll pass it back over to Grant.
Thanks so much, Marcus. Fantastic study that you've done there, because it really gives some insight into things that, well, we ourselves experience it, but we went out to ask other accredited entities and others in that some of them with whom we are working, some of them we're not working with, to give that feedback. This issue of the climate rationale, the feedback, multiple rounds of feedback, these sorts of things, I think is something that everyone can empathize with and feel we're all having that experience. But as you said right at the beginning, it's a lot of money. There needs to be due diligence. So there need to be these types of checks and balances, and we need great projects. So it's trying to get some perhaps balance or some blend of these two that is the big challenge here for GCF. We're now going to have a look at the GCF board meeting. I'm going to run us through that, and we'll deal with questions as they come. Archie, thanks very much for that question. Our sample size wasn't really big enough to distinguish between these issues of direct access or private sector. But just from our own very sample size of one, our own experience of this, the issue of capacity related to direct access entities and terminology and language related to the private sector are really significant factors there. And that terminology, that distinction, you can see in a recent podcast that I did with the folks from FMO and Eversource Capital. They were talking about that translation between the private sector and a public sector organization and GCF, and translating the language and getting that all harmonized there as being one of those challenges. So you can listen in on that podcast there. But yeah, we don't have a big sample size in order to be able to do that. And of course, we've got a selection bias because we're responding. What we're reflecting is people that have responded, obviously, to the survey. So we'll have a chance to talk more on this. And Ben, thanks. We'll get to that comment as well when we get to sort of the chance to respond to questions. I'm going to jump straight in. Let me just get my screen shared for this and make some observations from the board meeting. We hope that by doing this, we can save you trawling through the long deliberations and in some cases the frustrating deliberations that take place. It is a little bit like a soap opera at some stages. That's my personal view, not being a great soap opera watcher, that is, but I mean, it feels a little bit like a soap opera at times. So I'm going to make some observations. There's lots that we can talk about from this board meeting. I'm going to start with some insights on the GCF portfolio and the priorities that are expressed. And this really comes out of the initial presentation right near the beginning of the board meeting from the executive director around where things stand and the strategic plan programming targets. So that I'll start with. Then we'll talk about the Integrated Results Management Framework, the IRMF. That is big news because it was approved finally 2 years later at this board meeting. We'll look at the approved proposals, and an important part of the board meeting was that the ITAP comments had been sent for the of rejected projects had been sent for the first time to board members. And this produced some interesting additional dynamic there. And then finally, some little points about the next board meetings. We've got a little chart which we think might be helpful for everyone participating. Okay, so jumping straight into this. Firstly, Yannick Glimarek made a presentation right near the beginning, giving an update, and this allows us to get some insight into the portfolio priorities. And he started off talking about origination and the importance of origination. He made the point that, in his words, we've got 3 balances and 3 pluses. These three balances that he is trying to achieve as a secretariat is between grant and non-grants, between adaptation and mitigation, and between this regional balance across the world. So these are the three balances that they're working on, and three pluses: increasing the impact per dollar, and for mitigation projects, emissions; for adaptation projects, beneficiaries, increasing that impact; increasing resources channeled through direct access entities; and increasing resources channeled through private sector projects. And it's really those last two factors, and perhaps the balance between adaptation and mitigation, which he focused in on, and which I think give us so many interesting signals. So on the one side, this aspect, adaptation mitigation balance, and these increasing resources channeled through direct access entities and through private sector projects. And let me just present those figures, and then you'll see how that impacts us when we're thinking about the proposals that we're putting together and the projects that we're working on. So firstly, in order to increase the resources channel to meet the targets of the strategic programming targets, they need to increase the resources 3 times from what they currently are for direct access entities, and increase it 2 times for private sector facility projects. So that's a really big ask. Firstly, in terms of direct access entities, there are 62 direct access entities, but only 21 of them have got funded projects and have approved projects. So this is a real and significant issue for GCF. They have published a direct access entity DAE action plan, and the core element of that, in Yannick Glemarek's words, is a cradle-to-grave support for project development for direct access entities. That's the action plan in order to address this issue. If you are a direct access entity or working with direct access entities, this is an important aspect in terms of how to get projects from concept note to funded proposals. The comment from Executive Director was, we have lots of concept notes, but they do not result in projects. And that's the puzzle that they're trying to address. Now, at the same time, they have to address this issue of adaptation mitigation. So you want to address this and this. Well, the point is that from the direct access entities, so far, only 18% of the projects are adaptation projects. So there is a bit of a dilemma as it currently stands, in that they need to ramp up direct access entity projects and maintain the balance or increase the adaptation projects in the portfolio. You'll see that a little bit later. They need to do both of these things. In a way, there's some sort of trade-off there. It was clarified later that there isn't really a trade-off, but they have to do both of these aspects. Now, it becomes even a bigger issue when you're talking about private sector projects, this aspect of it. That's the private sector facility, the PSF. It needs to double the amount of resources through private sector facility in order to meet the programming targets. But taking into account the adaptation mitigation balance, they actually need to quadruple the adaptation projects. They need to make a very significant increase in private sector adaptation projects. So we're talking here about 4 times adaptation projects, just 2 times overall in terms of resources. We're talking here about 3 times the resources funneled through direct access entities. And on top of that, the balance between adaptation is that direct access entities, I'm going to end up writing it backwards, direct access entities are currently only at 18%. Yeah, these are the situation. So, you know, that's the challenge. Now, what does that really mean for us? It means that GCF is pulling forward projects that are adaptation, direct access entities, and private sector projects. And in order to meet the target, it's been up until now, each board meeting, approximately $1 billion of approved GCF funding. Yannick said that they have just reached an inflection point. There always used to be more money than projects. Now they have more projects than money. What does that mean? It means that there is now competition for projects to get that money. And you can see on top of it GCF's balances and pluses. This means that it's got, and this is our own experience, again, speaking from our own point of view on it, it's got a whole lot more difficult to do projects that don't match these particular elements to it. Yannick said they're not holding back mitigation projects. Indeed, mitigation projects are moving forward in the portfolio. Our own experience is that it's now more difficult, especially from international and direct access entities. So that's personal viewpoints on this. There was, I ought to just mention one other small issue here is really related to the improvement in efficiencies, which I found interesting, that Yannick Glemarek said that at board meeting 16, when they started, the time period from concept note to approved project was 25 months. By board meeting 27, it was 12 months. I wonder if that's going up 27, 28 to 29 or not, because of these to board meeting 30 maybe as well. We'll start to see some of that influence. Those figures, according to the executive director, have been reached through improved processes. So that's great there. All right, so those are the insights really related to this portfolio priority. I think if you're a private sector direct access entity doing an adaptation project, the red carpet will be rolled out for you. If you are not matching those three different criterias, of course, there are many different aspects there, and it's a personal viewpoint on it here. All right, hope there are questions and insights and chat on that. The next point is the integrated results management framework. It's been debated, or at least raised, in board meeting 22. There was an independent evaluation unit report on the results management framework. This led into it. A number of times during the board meeting, board members said, we've been talking about this for 2 years. Perhaps some of that behind the scenes, because board meeting 23 didn't cover it and other board meetings didn't as well. But we know that at least the last 3 board meetings, this point has been raised and it has been postponed after some debate. One of the reasons for that is that there was an idea as COVID started to take hold around the world, that policy decisions would need to be postponed, but there are frustrations that have built up around this. So at the start of board meeting 29, the co-chairs presented a compromise, trying to meet everyone's needs. This introduced adjusted terminology. It put a country-driven focus into the document for the results management framework, really around the idea of respecting sovereignty that was there. And there was a financial package of support to direct access entities to help them deal with the changes of the integrated results management framework. It's around $12 million that was put forward. And the handbook with guidance would be approved by the board. So what actually happened? This was put forward immediately. A number of board members said, we cannot agree to this. There was pretty much a split between the developed countries and the developing countries. The developing countries, as I understand it, were in favor of this new compromise. Many of the developed countries were saying, no, they cannot accept it. It was debated for a long time. Then there was a small working group created. The small working group worked overnight, reported back the next day, and said, here's what we've created. And there was an impassioned presentation from board member from Egypt about yes, this is what, we've reached something here. But again, a number of parties, notably the representative from Denmark, from Germany, but many others from developed countries were saying it made great progress, but we're not ready for it. And the whole deal the day before was, we'll give this one chance now. Little element that I missed is that the US board member said, we've discussed this long enough, it's time for a vote. We need to put in place, we need to take this measure where we can't reach consensus, we're now going to vote on it. They said, we'll work on it one night, if we can't reach consensus, we'll vote. The next day, consensus wasn't reached. Okay, so that's the first day to the second day, the consensus wasn't reached. Then there was what seemed like an interminable discussion around points of order, and what eventually went to debate, what eventually went to vote, was the co-chairs, what is the exact word for it? I can't remember, but the co-chairs said, we don't think we've exhausted the discussion on this. We believe consensus can be reached, but we need more time. And then they voted on whether more time should be given. And the way it turned out was that it was like 8 people voted against the motion not to continue, 4 abstained, and the board decided to go into the small groups again, to the working group again, to discuss further this. And yeah, so it went pretty much the whole day spent on that. Again, the groups worked overnight on this, and the next day came with a plan that could be agreed by everyone. So it did reach consensus, and that's a really great achievement there. There was a little bit of positioning around it, but let me just tell you something about the consensus as I understand it. It hasn't been published as a revised document, to my knowledge. This is the document that went in at the beginning of board meeting 29. It's got a structure. The structure is around starting at the overall top level results of the project right up here, around paradigm shift and sustainable development potential. And then there is this aspect, and this is part of the clarification, is this is an outcome level, all of this. And then there is a project and program level area of changes within the results framework. The first point that was heavily debated was around the use of the word, let me just change the color of my pen, the use of the word sustainable development potential here in the top, and the use of this term co-benefits here. So they've removed the reference to sustainable development potential here, and co-benefits and sustainable development potential has been put down into a program level indicator. So this is something that you track down there, and sustainable development is an element, is the wording that GCF use around co-benefits. You'll know in terms of the GCF funding proposal and concept note structure. So co-benefits is moved down there, and the word is paradigm shift in the context. So I'm not going to be able to probably write it efficiently, but it's here, in context of, sustainable development. So this is the first aspect of that change. And this is flowed through the whole document. The 3 factors on which the paradigm shift potential is now based. You remember we used to have, as part of paradigm shift, we used to have innovation, all sorts of other aspects now there. But now we are talking about 3 things. One is the scalability, one is the replicability, and I probably should change colors now. And the third aspect is the sustainability. So you can see sustainable development potential, but this is sustainability of results. signifies that paradigm shift potential. So this is a rearrangement of the issue. The other big clarification was that this blue color here and this purplish color here was confusing people, because these were seen as different levels: firstly enabling environment, then impact potential. But both of these really, as I mentioned already, are now colored the same, signifying that these are quantitative indicators, and this is a mix of quantitative and qualitative, but at a similar level there. So that was another big change. And then a few others that are not shown on this is the integration of the text related to Paris Agreement and some changes there. So the handbook, the developed countries were saying, why should the handbook go to the board? No other handbooks have gone to the board about how to do this methodology. But in fact, as I understand it, the agreement was that it will indeed go to the board. There also was emphasized that there is no change in the investment framework that we already know and love. These 6 different elements of the investment framework are not changed. What is changed is the indicators and perhaps some structural issues, and that the direct access entity support will go ahead. There were questions around, what is this 12 million? Why is it being created here? And actually, we're not making major changes. We're just shifting things around. And therefore, this is the factor to it. So that was part of this change. Yeah, okay, I got to get a move on. I want to talk about the projects. I'm going to try and do this in maybe 5 minutes or so, and then we'll be able to deal with questions that you have. So the next element was about the projects and the projects that were approved. What was of a lot of interest to people were the status before the ITAP review over here and after ITAP review, in that you can see that 3 adaptation projects went into ITAP and 1 came out. There were 3 cross-cutting projects, and what came out was 1 of them, and 1 of those cross-cutting moved over to become a mitigation project. So that was the sort of, so this one got down to 1, this one got down to 1, and 1 of them moved over there. That's the effect that you can see there. The adaptation funding is significantly smaller in the project. The overall impact on portfolio is not so important. We went from 2 direct access entities down to 1. And so a lot of the developing country board members in particular were saying that there needs to be a review of ITAP veto on projects. And it was a well-argued and strongly motivated issue about the difficulty of getting through the ITAP review. And there was some debate about this. I understand that the decision is to talk further about the ITAP in it. So that's one of those impacts of this overall discussion. Well, the amount of funding went down from 884 to 101, going to 501 going to the board. They approved 4 projects. These you can see here. I'm not going to go into detail of them. I could run through each of them and what they're trying to achieve. The main issue from board members, there were comments, I think, which resonated with board members from the civil society active observers. For many of these, around the consultation process and the process of bringing beneficiaries in to understand projects and such like. So that was an important aspect. And that this FPIC, the free prior informed consent related to projects. So I think many of these, certainly the light rail one and the TREPA one, got those sorts of questions from the board. I think we can see more of this coming into project designs. Related to the LEAF project, which was a PV project, there is this question around labor conditions and standards and ensuring that there is adequate checking of the supply chains of solar PV and such like, and do organizations have in place the right standards and checks and balances to ensure those supply chains reflect best practice and not abusive labor processes. We are working on some PV projects, and we're seeing the Secretariat and the OGC, the General Council questions are immediately and focusing on that question. What are your checks and balances related to supply chain? It's an important thing for us to bear in mind there. Okay, that's enough on the proof projects. Just the pipeline for board meeting 30. I found this quite interesting, again, for project development perspective. They were originally considering 1.9 billion. They went down to this factor. This aspect to do with under consideration, it's gone smaller, but they expect coming out of the ITAP review approximately 900. So you can see that they are still expecting fall away from ITAP. I think that's a really important factor here. For me, the big pity is not what ITAP is doing. I like it, but that it comes so late in the process, and somehow the Secretariat are not managing to get the projects ready so that they can go through ITAP. Why should ITAP be a gatekeeper at the end? All that information about climate rationale and how we do things should be there from the start. You can't let the project go all the way to ITAP after hundreds of days of work, and it suddenly falls on you've used the wrong RCP or the wrong period or wrong 30-year data and such like. That is the issue, not the ITAP, in my personal opinion. Okay, very final comment here. The board meeting dates were approved, no objection to the dates. These are the dates, and we have, and again, I'm putting a disclaimer on it, these are just indicative dates of when things might happen. You may want to take a screenshot of that or get it in the replay toolkit that we'll send. These are just indicative. We know already that CIC 3 for board meeting 30 is actually going to take place on Monday, the 19th. In afternoon, 3 p.m. Korea time, I understand. So, but these numbers that you can see here come from the programming manual of the GCF. So we've just calculated them back. Having those at hand is a really useful thing if you're targeting one of the board meetings. By which time do you have to have had each of these steps? That's hopefully a useful bit of insight for it, and that's me. I'm sorry I've gone on a little bit. I've got some colleagues emphasizing that we need to get to the Q&A. Thank you very much. Thank you for those comments. Let me have a look at them. And oh, getting some emoji thumbs up. Really appreciate that. Ben, okay, so let me just go there. We've got some upvotes on them. Remember, you can add your questions and upvote them there. Ben, you've got an upvote on one of your questions, views on how to address these massive challenges, particularly direct access entities who may be constrained in project development. Given the project preparation facility takes a long time, yeah, PPF request. So I haven't seen the direct access entity action plan. I searched for it. Yannick said that it was available in, and then I couldn't catch the word of what he said. Maybe it's in some internal documents because not all of them are publicly published. I don't really know. If someone knows where that is, I'd like to have a look at it. He talked about cradle to grave support. I think, you know, it's around building capacity. It's around, which I know is part of what you're involved in, Ben, and the CFAN network. Yeah, welcome other thoughts from others, from my colleagues, from anyone else there. Archie, do we find that red carpet is indeed rolled out from DAE proposals? We do find the process a bit easier, but I was talking with the folk from Micronesia Conservation Trust just recently. They got their project approved in board meeting 28. Great. I'd recommend listening to their podcast to learn about their experiences. It was tough for them. So red carpet perhaps is not the right word for it. We all perceive this differently. And if you're talking about 150 million from the GCF project, or we're talking about an 8.5 million project for a smaller project, the experience of project development, I guess, will be different. So that sort of red carpet issue. Oh, I was supposed to click the start live answer there. Sorry, Archie. That's the perspective on that, I think. Anyone else want to add anything there? Colleagues. Is it indeed rolled out? Well, we've seen very uphill struggles from some international projects. It could be an issue. Come back if we want to talk more about that. Fiona, you've said, will the Integrated Resource Management Framework, IRMF, figures be published at project level, or will they be portfolio level? You're meaning targets? I guess you're meaning targets there. And there aren't targets related to the framework. The framework, principally, most of the funding proposal will remain the same. There's no timeline given in the document, but most of they need to update the templates. They need to update the handbook. The handbook must go to the board as well for its review and approval, which is unusual, but it was accepted at the end of the day. The log frame is going to change. It's the structure of the log frame, and all those indicators that we know and love will be shifted and renamed and aligned with other funds, and also a more logical structure. I'm really pleased for the change, and to be honest, I don't fully see the need for some big change management process. It seems to me that you look at the framework and you address it within the log frame and the theory of change, and you're done. That's my view. I might be proven wrong, but that's my own view on it. There. I should have got some colleagues of mine onto the stage as well, because you're probably getting tired of my voice. But this is the way I've got it at the moment. Okay. And then Nalan, you have asked a question. Post-approval implementation takes a while to start. What measures have been undertaken to accelerate this? Well, I mean, the process shifts to the accredited entity for delivery. Of those projects that were approved in the last board, I know at least the FAA, is it, or FFA? The funding agreement was signed during the board meeting for the TREPA project. It went ahead during the board meeting, and that establishes the baseline. There may be some conditions precedent in there that must be met before the actual activities can start. But as far as I know, the task now becomes the challenge of getting mobilized. And I haven't heard, if you're experiencing different, I haven't heard that the problem is one that is caused by the GCF at that stage. But happy to be enlightened on more on that. So the start, Micronesia Conservation Trust project from board meeting 28 was also signed during the board meeting as well. So this is a factor there, I think. Okay, let's see if there's anything else to talk about this. And let me just check in with my colleagues. All right. I mean, we're almost done in terms of the time. Okay, Fiona, you've mentioned here the impact per dollar on mitigation. Do they rank projects on the basis of dollars per ton? I don't know. I don't know that aspect to it. Really, it's one of the areas that the board was trying to increase the value for money of it, but we haven't received that sort of feedback. We've been working on a project where one of them went forward and we saw the comments related to it, project we've not been involved in. You can find this in the board meeting 28, for example. They have a very low cost per ton for the project, and one we're working on has got sort of 3 times that, but there's been no feedback saying it's too expensive or anything like that. Yeah, I guess that's part of a factor there. Hopefully that helps there. Archie, thanks so much about the podcast with Joe Puri. I love that. You probably heard that in my voice. Really fascinated by the work that IFAD is doing on risk insurance and such like. Really recommend checking out that podcast. I'm a long format person. I like long types of interviews and insights, as you can probably hear from our webinar today. If that's for you, that is about a 50-minute interview. Carolina, you've asked Marcus a question. Marcus, you're typing it. Do you want to address this? Come on. Yeah, great.
Yes. So thank you, Carolina, for your question. I think this is quite a difficult question as there are different areas, but I'd say one of the key areas would be on...
Just let's run through the questions. Says, what do you see are the key areas to improve GCF country programming in order to get high impact proposals? One that indicates country needs and vision, what they want to do and how they're going to do it. Sorry, Marcus, interrupted you. Carry on.
Yes, that's okay. So I think I would say the key area would be on making sure that your project or program aligns with national priorities and strategies. I think one of the key things is aligning activities with documents such as nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, and making sure that your proposals include high mitigation potential activities if it's a mitigation project, and addressing adaptation needs if it's an adaptation project. One of the things that we often hear from project designers that they struggle with is that when they identify climate vulnerabilities in their target region or target country, the GCF often comments that they don't specifically and successfully link the activities within the program or project to how it addresses those vulnerabilities and how it fits within the broader national priorities. So I think that's certainly an area that project designers can improve in. Grant, do you have anything to add on that, especially with regards to the implementation arrangements that Carolina's asked about?
Yeah, and country programming is one of my hobby horses, and you maybe don't want to get me started, at least in this webinar, because it might carry on for quite a long time, because you've got to balance a number of different things. And I think to get high impact proposals that respond to country needs and vision, I completely agree with you, Marcus. These are the sort of key issues, but I think it's almost a mechanism that we need to look at differently. It's got to align with country needs and priorities, and defining the country needs and priorities are something that governments are responsible for. It's something that is driven by a country perspective on things. And so that's sort of the baseline of this is what our country needs and what we as citizens of this country prioritize. These areas, this is what we want. But projects, high impact projects, I think those come not just from government, but from citizens, organizations within the country. And so the key is, how do you unlock those ideas? Because there's so often country programming that ends up with a wish list of different project ideas with no owners, no one that really wants to take the risks of putting their own effort at risk, perhaps their own money at risk, willing to drive forward this sort of priority. And we've seen a number of country programming approaches which have resulted in wish lists, yet another list of prioritized projects, and then 2 years from now, we'll make another list of prioritized projects. And we've seen in other countries situations where they've defined their country priorities and then launched competitions, open to government, open to civil society, open to the private sector, for project ideas that those people will drive forward. And it's one of my personal views that this will result in much greater real ownership from people who are very interested in those projects, and secondly, much higher impact. So I think that's sort of a process that we advocate, and I advocate every time I have a chance. And that was a nice chance. So thank you, Caroline, for that chance to do it. Okay. Hopefully that's useful insight. Yeah, we haven't had any other questions. I'm going to give you just one little insight, and then I think we'll draw this session to a close. At the board meeting, there were a number of information documents made available to the board. You can find it on the website of the GCF under board meeting 29. They weren't even looked at. There was about 20 different documents that the board didn't have a chance to look at. And one of them caught my eye. It's a policy. It wasn't approved. It hasn't gone anywhere, but it's called the Policy on Incremental Cost and Full Cost Methodologies. So it's this one. Bear in mind, it was not agreed by the board. It was not reviewed by the board. There are no feedback on it, but it gives a sense of where the Secretariat sees it going. How do I make the focus my screen, not the Q&A? Hang on a second. I think if I do that, yeah, you can probably see it now. So this is the document itself. If you're really interested in the future vision of where GCF is going on incremental cost and full cost methodologies, when we do training, this is one of the big issues that people ask about quite a lot. We do training all around the world on proposal development. When we do that, and this is hot off the press, and it's not approved, but it shows it's got a whole lot of information and insight there. What I wanted to do was just to show you something really interesting at the end. This little chart is very interesting as well, around the process of understanding assessment of eligibility and where co-financing and things like that. If you're interested in, have a look into that document. It's on the GCF website. If you head down though into this proposal here, you can see an annex which says, where is it? There we go. This is fascinating. Illustrative examples, and they're not board approved, illustrative examples of how incremental cost and full costs might be considered in a small set of hypothetical GCF projects. And it says case 1, case 2, and it talks about what the baseline project and counterfactual one is, and for all different ones. And then you can see that, you know, a whole range of mitigation and adaptation ones. For example, national development plans, counterfactual scenario in absence of any project, same as baseline. So incremental costs equal the full cost of the project. As you can see, that's they've written it just over there. This is really useful. We're going to incorporate that into our training going forward around it, even not approved, but at least it's showing us some of the Secretariat's thinking on the baseline project, the project alternative, and the counterfactual, and how to address those issues. Useful resource, I think. That's it. Oh, there's something under questions. Let's see here. Oh, good. Okay. Pauline, how do community organizations like Rural Women Network plug in the country priorities? That's an interesting question. Let's see. So I don't know much about your network, but there are a number of different paths to getting engaged in GCF projects and project development. As a network, you may well be in the role of, you could be subcontracted, or you could be advising within projects and such like. I mean, you've specifically said in country priorities, and that has to do with country prioritization processes, I would guess. Don't know if I'm giving a very useful answer there. And my apologies, Pauline, on that. Marcus, do you have some thoughts and insights there? And community organizations certainly are eligible for GCF projects. I wonder if I can try and quickly show you a slide that deals with this, but if not, I'll send something through to you after the webinar. Okay, hang on a second. I've lost the screen here. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to. I didn't find it in the first few clicks, so I will get back to you on that. Now, Mamadou, welcome. What are the key shortcomings in rejected projects? The answer would help to improve the new projects. Yes, that's a great point. Now, the ITAP report of rejected projects was only made available to board members. There was a little bit of view you can see if you watch the video on it, where one board member and also the head of the ITAP revealed some of that insight into it. But let me at least tell you the message and the mood of it. A very large proportion of the comments related to the climate rationale. And climate rationale that Marcus presented with some of the recommendations on it in terms of, is this project a development project, what the ITAP call vanilla projects, it doing development, good development, or is this project responding to climate change? And that's a very hard point to answer, because you need to know what the climate models are saying so that you can show that there is a cause that is resulting in the problem that this project is addressing. And we're increasing resilience because of a climate driver that is producing climate hazards, that is producing eventually the problem that we are tackling. So that's one of the big issues there. But it's not only that. There are also concerns around whether the proposed activities are actually addressing the problems that have been identified. So you have certain problem identified, certain activities that are proposed. It's also part of the climate rationale. But do these activities address this problem? That was, and we saw a flicker of a slide which was talking about that for a particular project as well. Okay, if there are no additional questions, I think we're going to call it a day, and we'll end there. We thank you so much for your participation. I can see someone's typing, but in the meantime, we'll be sending the webinar replay kit via your registered email. Just keep an eye out for that. You can easily contact us. My email, grant@ekltdgroup.com, and Marcus's email, marcus@ekltdgroup.com. Find us online. Connect with us. We enjoy discussing these things. I can get a little bit passionate about some of these things. If you have further questions, just do let us know. Do subscribe to the podcast, and if you can give reviews, that's even better for us. Really appreciate it. All right, we'll leave things there. I don't see anything else coming in. And thanks for all the thumbs up. Really appreciate it. See you at the next webinar or sooner, if that's possible. Really found it, as I said, a privilege that you would join us for this webinar today. Thank you very much, and goodbye.